Well, the best definition that I have for general education that I've received since coming over here, actually that I brought with me from Lewis and Clark, is that general education is teaching students the ability to think critically and to be exposed to rigor, academic rigor, and perspectives from different disciplines, so that when they graduate, they're fully educated. They're educated in the sciences and philosophy. They can tackle problems from different perspectives, and they can come up with solutions that were probably very different than they would have gotten had they used specifically the methodologies and the ways of thinking in the discipline that's their major. So it's basically getting them to think outside of the program of study that they themselves have selected. So general education, the definition I've given to people I've met with here, for a GE course, it's how do you teach your discipline, both the methods of the discipline and the importance of the discipline in the larger sense to students who are never going to study that formally, apart from that one course, and who almost certainly won't go into that field as a profession when they graduate. So that's general education in a nutshell, although general education's definition varies depending on who you ask, and GE programs also vary quite a bit because they have to fit with the mission of the institution, and so it's not necessarily the best thing for an institution to do is to imitate lock, stock, and barrel a program that seems to have worked at one college or university and apply that without any change to their own. So GE is always a process of finding what fits best, the type of students, the type of institution, the institutional mission, and the goal that the institution has for its students when they graduate. You really can't do that. When I first met with my colleagues at Hong Kong Baptist, I was talking about all of the different programs that I've studied, and then I talked specifically about the program that I had at Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark is a small liberal arts college in the west coast of the United States, and it's very different than a lot of other schools, big research universities, state schools, community colleges. And so I showed some examples of GE programs in the United States to my new colleagues, including programs at the service academies at West Point, at large universities like the University of Texas, and then at small colleges, more like what I'm used to. GE has to fit with the mission of the program. If there's a particular history to the institution, if it's been founded in a religious tradition, Southern Methodist University or Notre Dame are going to have different goals for their students than the University of Ohio, just because of the nature of that. And some of these institutions, particularly religious institutions, often have a very contemplative side to them based in the religion that actually lends itself to GE. Other universities recruit students from all over the country, from around the world, and they have a very large and diverse student body, and that in itself, just the composition of the students, brings something to GE. So students and faculty alike, when they look at GE courses, they should look at the assets that they bring, the assets that the institution has, and maybe some deficiencies that an innovative GE program could begin to make up for as well. I think they should go hand in hand. What I've seen at various schools and what's being done at the Hong Kong Baptist University is a good blend of the major, which obviously requires foundational introductory courses and will allow the students to engage in study at a more advanced level and in some ways a more pre-professional level than anything else that they do in their university education. And in some cases it prepares them for crediting exams, it prepares them for career standards that they have to meet. And it prepares them to get licensed or accredited in a profession. So the major is very important in that regard. But you can train somebody to do a job, and the employers will appreciate that. But the employers will also train their own people as well from the entry level onward. What an employer can't do is educate their workforce. And for people who are going to be promoted to middle management, senior management, that education is going to come into play. The ability to respond to unexpected situations, the ability to appreciate perspectives that are not their own, especially if they're dealing with companies and clients in other parts of the world, and the ability just to be able to think critically and to look at problems in a variety of ways. A company really can't teach their people to do that. They sort of expect that their leaders in the company are going to be able to do that, or whatever organization it is, if it's government, NGO, anything like that. So, I mean, it's a long answer to your question, but the major and the GE should go together. They're almost like opposite sides of the same coin. They're not things that are in conflict with each other, the coin being the overall education. And so what I've suggested is that GE courses, to the extent that it's possible, run concurrently with courses in the major. So that the student is taking GE courses in the first year, maybe foundational courses to introduce them to university level education, and then continues to take those GE courses, a greater variety, all the way into the fourth year as the major itself progresses. So in the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, the major is building upon work that's been done before toward a more advanced level, toward a capstone maybe. And in general education, you're building upon the knowledge that you have, but you're doing it in new ways. So you're going to new subjects. And the reason I suggest that they run concurrently is that GE shouldn't be considered the sort of junior portion of the college or university education that should be gotten out of the way of, one should get out of the way early. And then once that's done, move on to the important part. And so in some cases, you see this in the U.S. sometimes, GE courses tend to be front-loaded in the first and second year, and then the final year is dedicated to the major. So that's how I would see it. And then, of course, electives, which at Lewis and Clark are a full third of a student's undergraduate curriculum. At Hong Kong Baptist, they're slightly less than that. But electives are important, too. You want students to have a bit of freedom, and you want them to be able to pursue their own interests in a way that a more fixed or structured curriculum might not allow them to do that. So don't undersell the importance of electives as well. Well, the partnership between GE and advising is always something that's up for discussion. And again, it's one of those things where advising can be done in a variety of different ways. GE in some U.S. universities is also in charge of student advising, especially for the first-year students. And that's because they haven't declared a major, so there's no natural place to put them when it comes to advising. And it's through GE that a student will be introduced to an advisor, and the advisor will work with the GE program. And the advisor will be a good person not merely to sign off the student's schedule of classes for the coming semester and send it up to the registrar, but to actually ask the student about what courses are the most interesting, what courses are the most difficult, to draw connections between what's being learned, both the substance of what's being learned and the methods being used in one discipline, and then relate them to something seemingly unrelated in another class the student's taking. And that's something that's best done in the first year or two. And then when a student's selected a major, then the advising could be handed over to a faculty advisor or a staff advisor within the major. But in Hong Kong, since students are admitted into the majors, that's not always a good way to do it. Certainly in dealing with the broader issues too. I think once universities move toward admission into the major, once the student has already started, then advising within GE will make a lot more sense. But advising is one of those things that's traditionally underrated. Even in U.S. universities, there's scholarship and publication, there's teaching, which is all important, and there's service to the university and to the academic community. And then advising gets shunted in somewhere underneath, and it's a responsibility that is definitely often overlooked. And it's also something that probably could have the most salient effect on a student, because the advisor is not evaluating the student for a course. So in some ways it takes the pressure off, but it's a distinctly academic and mentoring relationship. So an advisor can be an advocate for a student, an advisor can be somebody who will help the student project outward. And many of the things that we talk about in GE, about drawing connections between different disciplines, the advisor is the single person in the student's life who's in the best position to do that, even more so than an instructor in a GE course, because again, the student will only take that instructor for that particular course. So, yeah. Well, I think the first thing that a university should do when they're considering what a first-year experience will be is to try and look at the experience of the first year through the students themselves. And the best way to do that is just remember the way that they were when they were first-year students. And I often do that. I think about how excited I was, but also how absolutely clueless I was. Not just about larger intellectual issues and about the courses that I was going to take, but just about how the university functioned, how I was supposed to manage my time, what was my responsibility as a student, my academic responsibility, what about integrity, what about socializing with other students. A lot of these students are going to university, especially in Hong Kong, as students who are the first in their family to do so with the increased admissions. So they have no parents or older generation, or in some cases even older siblings or cousins, who can give them any sort of advice about how to be a university student, how to get through it successfully. So a first-year experience program should show students what it is that's expected of them, and also the best way that they can contribute, what activities to get involved with. If they run into difficulty, the advisor should be there to help. But also, it's a way of building cohesion among a first-year class. So these students are, I mean, if experience is anything to go by, people who don't know each other in the first week but are likely to become lifelong friends. Many of them are likely to be spouses. They're likely to get married. I mean, think of all the people that you knew in college and the friendships that you've maintained and the people you know who married somebody that they met in the first year. So it's an important milestone in their life, even if the students can't appreciate it themselves. And a good first-year experience will create that kind of cohesiveness and that bond among students that makes it distinctive for them in that class, not necessarily better or worse than other classes, but something that they all have as a common experience. And that will serve the university well because the students will graduate with an enormous sense of loyalty, an increased sense of loyalty, as long as the experience is a good one. And that will help build strong alumni networks and also help them network when students graduate and then move abroad to other cities or to different regions of Asia.